Good day, and welcome to this month's episode of Diversity Speaks, True Talk with Terri. I'm Terri Howard, Associate Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Herzing University. At Herzing, we believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are a living, breathing part of who we are and what we do. And we've created this series in part because we wanted to create a forum for civil discourse. We won't always agree, but let's speak our truths in a way where we can listen, learn, and as a result, grow. Also, there are a lot of questions out there around topics related to diversity and inclusion. We hope to shed some light on these topics and leave you with something to think about. True Talk is about taking the time to really understand everyone. So let's get talking and speak our truths. Today's topic is integrating disabilities into the diversity conversation. I had a unique experience as a young person. I shared a bus to school with other students who attended another school. It happened to be the school for the deaf in my local community. I had the opportunity and blessing, actually, of getting to know many of these students through most of my grade school years. And I say blessing because I not only learned a little bit of American Sign Language, but I also learned a lot about a population of people who were different than me. There were other students, however, that didn't take the opportunity to learn. Instead, as many children do, they teased and mocked my new friends. In fact, many times I found myself being the peacekeeper and educating my fellow students on the importance of being kind. I know I'm better for having had this experience as a young person, and this is my truth. So why are we talking about integrating disabilities into the diversity conversation? Well, first, because it's a very large population of people we're talking about. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, about 26% of people in the United States have a disability. That's 1 in 4. That includes both visible disabilities, such as mobility impairments, and hidden ones, such as psychosocial or emotional conditions. And the second reason we should talk about it is because there's an impact when we don't. Research shows, for example, that college students with disabilities have lower graduation and retention rates than their peers without disabilities. In the past few years, some colleges and universities have started disability studies departments and programs. Others have created disability culture centers or even affinity groups, but these efforts are still less than common. And although many statements from college presidents and administrations make clear they understand disability to be a part of diversity, some would suggest that they still do not feel that higher education has accepted that disability is an axis of identity that can be celebrated. Part of the larger problem is that disability is often framed as an individual biomedical condition or as a technical problem that needs to be solved rather than a group identity. Disability is often regarded as an issue to be accommodated, as opposed to an identity to be celebrated. And when we do that, we foreclose any other discussion or experience or social power. I call this selective inclusion. So while colleges are engaging in much-needed efforts to diversify their faculty and student bodies, very few are engaged in efforts to actually recruit and retain faculty and students with disabilities. Let's talk about what this looks like at Herzing University. Our guest today is Emily Voswinkel, Director of Safety and Equal Opportunity, Title IX Coordinator, and ADA Coordinator. Of her many duties, Emily is responsible for the inclusion of students with disabilities. Thank you so much for joining us today, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
So we've been talking a little bit about how disabilities and people with disabilities are kind of continuing to evolve, if you will, in terms of an identity group. And I feel sometimes that much like race and ethnicity 10 years ago, even, people were seeing it as, I'm colorblind. I don't see, I don't see color. I don't see race. When the reality is, just like I think people with disability, not only do we need to acknowledge it, but we need to embrace it and, in fact, celebrate it. So, can you talk about kind of the overall vision that we have at Herzing relative to embracing this diverse population?
Sure. Um, as you said, there's definitely still, some stigma attached to the idea of living with a disability. It can make people uncomfortable. And, we've seen similar to the idea of, being colorblind in terms to race and ethnicity, some of the othering of individuals with disabilities, and such things as, too much focus on using person first language and trying to deny the identity of individuals with that have disabilities, um, from their identity. And so at Herzing, we're trying to embrace sort of all of our diversity, and certainly that includes disabled individuals and um, those uh, students who need additional support due to a variety of reasons that could be considered as a disability.
That's great, Emily. And so I think to that end, I'd like you to speak a little bit to the support itself, right? So, how do we encourage folks to take advantage of the disability services that we have?
Sure. So primarily, we've been trying to just increase visibility to the availability of disability services for students. So we've done things like try to improve visibility within our own systems for current students, and increase visibility of the availability of services to prospective students. And services include a variety of things. So it might involve some physical accommodations, or changing some of our physical facilities to improve access for students, as well as academic accommodations for students who need accommodations for a wide variety of reasons. Those include things like accommodations for testing in the learning environment, in our clinical, partnering with our clinical partners to ensure full access for students in those environments as well.
I think that's great, and I think another program that we are about to launch, I think that's worthy of this conversation today, is our student resource group, and inviting students with disabilities to take part in understanding that they, as well as others who are a part of these groups, may have challenges or obstacles to completing their program. So, providing them the specific support that they need in order to graduate. So, that's great. That's great.
Definitely.
We have people that would like to chime into the conversation today and ask some questions. So I'm going to ask the first question to be asked.
I'm a disabled student. How much of this information is disclosed to the faculty and staff?
Sure. So we are very careful with student health information as it relates to disability. So once you would go through the process for requesting accommodations, um, that process is that information is only reviewed then by the academic dean at the campus, who serves as the location's ADA coordinator, and then by me, I serve as the university's central ADA coordinator. So any of that information is only the specific health information is only viewed by those two individuals, and it's retained centrally in a secure location. So only any approved accommodations or academic supports are shared with instructors. So it's always up to an individual's discretion whether they wish to share more of their personal information with a faculty member or staff member, if that's something that they want to do.
And I think that's great, because I think part of the anxiety for some people who are diverse, whether that is through disability or other categories, if you will, that they feel a degree of anxiety with their information being shared. So I love that it's about self-identifying, right? So whether it's a disability or gender orientation, any of that really should be at the discretion of the person who wants to self-identify. That's great. Can we have the next question, please?
How can faculty and staff support disabled students without having them feel like they're being called out?
Sure. So definitely similarly to how I spoke about how it's up to an individual student whether they want to share any information with a faculty or staff member. I encourage faculty and staff to really individualize any accommodations for a student, and to have a one-on-one conversation with a student about what's going to best meet their needs, and how they would feel most comfortable having that whatever accommodation they may have implemented. So for students with perhaps a testing accommodation where they take tests in a separate space from the class, for example, the instructor might ask if it'd be helpful for that student to have the class take a break, and during that break time, that student can go into the testing room, and the other students would return to the classroom, making it less obvious that somebody's leaving, if that's something that they, would make them more comfortable. So it's a pretty specific example, but things like that, it really is a disability is something that's very personal to the individual living with it. So really making sure that we're understanding their own comfort level and what their desire is in terms of, how that's accommodated, what that looks like.
That's great. All of what you have provided us with or shared with us today speaks to what I call a great first step in terms of not only accommodating, but also celebrating people with disabilities. So I'm excited to work with you on moving the needle forward in this capacity. Emily, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you again for having me. My pleasure.
Some might suggest that a shift in higher education requires greater societal changes and acknowledgments. We're making progress, but we need to continue making a deliberate effort to include disability in statements and conversations about diversity. We need to have conversations with faculty about the classroom experience for this and every diverse population. We need to reckon with our own entrenched history around ability supremacy. We have for too long prioritized the, quote, normal body or, quote, normal mind. And at the end of the day, higher education will be defined by who it excludes. We can do the work, and at Herzing, we've chosen to. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our daily interactions with people with disabilities. As we go through our lives, we experience different things and develop particular attitudes. And it's not surprising to me that people will perceive the same situation differently. Let me give you an example. Imagine you spent the day at a disability awareness course. For the first time, you came to realize what an obstacle steps are to a person in a wheelchair. On your way home, you climb the same set of steps as you always do, but this time you see them differently. You wonder where the ramp is, reflecting that maybe the building is inaccessible to wheelchair users, unless they are to be carried in. Now imagine those steps again. You've been reading all the things you can do to keep fit. Of these things is to use the steps rather than the elevator. You get home and you can see the steps. You realize that there is an opportunity here to help you get fit and decide to run up them. Now, one more scenario. Last week it was raining and the steps outside your house were slippery and you fell down. You sprained your ankle and are very shaken up. You spend a few days recovering. Now today you leave the house and are faced with the steps. You feel anxious, remembering your pain and stress. You nervously approach the steps and take them one at a time, being careful not to slip. Note now how the set of steps has not changed, yet how you perceive them has. What's the lesson? Try looking at people from a new perspective. Do not believe stereotypes. Open your eyes to the world around you and see what's really going on. Question what you see and hear and stop making assumptions. And finally, think of this as an opportunity to think positive. If you are prepared to see the positive in all that is around you, then positive is what you will see. That's our truth, and that's our show for today. Join us for our next episode of True Talk.